On this week's box office prediction show, I'm talking about the King of Atlantis and seeing how much money Bird Box would make at the box office if it weren't on Netflix. Let's talk numbers. Welcome to Risker Reviews, and if this is your first time here, my channel is all about movies. In 2019, I decided to start my own box office prediction shows where I talk about the weekly box office every single week. I'm going to look at the actual numbers every week and the estimates and what I think is going to happen the next week and how I did and compare those numbers. If you're interested in how my predictions are for the entire 2019, I actually did a video on that and I'll link to that for you to watch it. So let's get into this week's box office. So in the previous week, on December 28th through the 30th, which was a holiday weekend pretty much, end of the year, people were out with their families to see movies. Families are home. So it was actually a pretty good box office weekend. And in fifth place, we have The Mule. So this is Clint Eastwood's movie. It's in its third week now. And this movie made $12.2 million. And that was actually a jump from previous weeks, and it's doing pretty well. I think the word of mouth on this movie, it has taken it to decent heights. This is a fairly cheap movie to make, considering a lot of the other visual effect movies that are out there. This is doing well. Next up on the list is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and this movie is another movie that did well over the holiday weekend. It made $18.8 million. This is a 14% jump from its previous week, and this is actually another movie that's in its third week. So Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is doing well, and I think as I get into my estimates a little bit that it can have some legs because of its good word of mouth as well. And third up, we have Bumblebee. Now, Bumblebee, of course, is the Transformers movie that has just come out. It's doing well critically. It has the highest rating of any Transformers movies to date, and that's because of the great plot and the superb acting of Haley Steinfeld. John Cena, not so much, but this movie actually made $20.9 million. This movie's doing decent overseas, actually. And this was actually a little bit of a drop-off, like a 3% drop-off from last week, but it's still doing well. And next up on the list at number 2, we have Mary Poppins Returns. And this movie, it's a family movie, so of course it's going to do well over the holidays. And this is a 20% jump from the previous week. It actually made $38.2 million in its second week, which is really good for Mary Poppins. I actually did expect this movie to do a little bit better than it has been, but I don't know the exact budget. That's actually something I didn't look into, but it's yet to be seen if families continue to come out to see this and if younger generations are actually interested in this character. And of course, at the top of the box office this week, we have Aquaman. So Aquaman ended up making $52.1 million, which was a 22% decrease from previous week when it opened, which is, it's normal. But I think that families would rather go see Mary Poppins than Aquaman because Mary Poppins has a little bit better reviews than Aquaman. And the King of Atlantis, he's in the DC universe, and those movies over the past few years just have not done well with people going to see them. So, that's what we have there. That's your weekly box office. Now, going over to my estimates, I actually am going to have a similar list. All these movies are on my list, so I'm just going to go down. I think Aquaman is going to do well at the box office. Still, I think there's going to be a decrease in it, about a 30% decrease, and I'm kind of comparing that to like a Wonder Woman, how that did in its run. Now, Wonder Woman was a better film, but I have Aquaman making $36 million the week of January 4th through the 6th. Next up on my list, I actually have Mary Poppins. And Mary Poppins, you know, you may have the families that are still going to see that. Maybe the stay-at-home mom or dad are taking their children there. And it's January is pretty much a slow month for movies. You know, it always has been traditionally, and this really is no exception this month. So I think Mary Poppins is a good family movie to go take your kids to. And next up, I'm actually switching Spider-Verse and Bumblebee. So Spider-Verse I have at number 3. And I have that making $16 million. So it's a little bit of a drop off from last week's, but that's okay because it's not a holiday weekend. And I just think that this movie has a good word of mouth going for it. People want to see a good Spider-Man movie and a good superhero movie. And yes, they're going to see Aquaman, but I think Spider-Man is something similar to Kingsman, where Kingsman released a few years ago in January, and it never did amazingly well at the box office any weekend, but it had legs and it consistently made money week after week after week. It kept trudging along, and I can actually see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse doing that. You know, next up is Bumblebee, and going along with kind of what I'm saying, it's interesting to see because we don't have a Star Wars this January making money, so a lot of these other movies can step in a little bit and step up their game. And with Bumblebee, I have that making $15 million, so just a little bit below Spider-Verse, you know, a little bit of a drop-off. That's about a 25% decrease from last week's as far as my estimate goes. I think this movie is going to do well. It's actually doing a lot better internationally than domestically, which is understandable. Typically, these movies crush the box office internationally. And last up on my list, I have The Mule. And I have The Mule making $7 million. It's another, you know, with Clint Eastwood. I think this movie is going to do well for a couple weeks. It's not going to make a crazy amount of money, but it's going to continue to do well. So here are my estimates. We'll see. Make sure you come back next week, check out my video to see what the actual totals are. And now something fun I wanted to get into was, you know, everybody's talking about Bird Box this weekend. And actually the past whole week, everybody's watching Bird Box. It's a Netflix movie that just released, Netflix original. And it's kind of a little bit of a suspense horror thriller. I have not seen it yet. I've heard it's a lot like A Quiet Place. I'm not one for scary movies, so I'll see if I watch it or not. But Netflix actually released some numbers saying that 45 million accounts have streamed Bird Box in its first 7 days. And that's a number, you know, Netflix doesn't typically release these numbers, but it's historic for them. It's something that has never been done on their streaming platform. So they released this number, and I got to thinking, how would that do at the box office? And so what I did was I took that 45 million accounts, divided that by 7, so that's about 6.4 million people per day. Now, it could have been more, could have been less, but that's 6.4 million accounts per day times 3 over a weekend, you know, if it was this opening weekend. So that's about 19.3 million accounts that watched over the weekend. Now, on the account, there could have been one person watching, two people watching, a whole family of 5 people watching. So those numbers are a bit finicky with exactly, you know, what's happening. Netflix didn't release those. So if you take that by the average cost of going to the movie theater, which is right now in the US $9.14. So you multiply the average accounts by the average cost of going to the theater, and you get $176 million opening weekend. Now that's assuming that everybody who watched Bird Box on Netflix would go out to watch it at the theater too. That's probably not the case, and I think that's why Netflix makes it a little bit easier for people to watch. But that's a pretty significant number right there, and one that is close, if not breaking, the highest ever horror movie at the box office in an opening weekend. Like that's a lot of money. It may have brought in that amount, and I don't even believe that A Quiet Place did. but I think people are just a little bit more comfortable in their homes. So that's the question of this week that I thought was a little bit fun to discuss. Let me know, if you watched Bird Box and what you thought about it. And I'd also like to know what your personal predictions are for the upcoming week. I'd appreciate it if you come back here next week and check out how I did and continuously come back to watch my box office prediction show in 2019. I'll see you next time.